Welcome to the Entrepreneurial Edge. I'm Chris Bishop. We're in Dubai and I'm here to meet a man who his business as an entrepreneur has circulated around this idea of getting passports for business people. His name is Armand Arton of Arton Capital, and he joins me in the studio here in Dubai right now. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And just to start off with, just give me a quick sketch of your entrepreneurial effort and exactly what you do.
I started this business out of personal experience, and as many of the great business in the world, it comes out of necessity. So for 3 generations, my family have been relocated for running from Armenian genocide, running from communism, and myself now trying to make the world a better place for my kids. I realized that very often the passport you were born with has a limitation in terms of where can you travel, where can you go, and with that comes a lot of other restrictions. Nearly 5 billion people today cannot travel more than 55 countries. And having grown up with a Bulgarian, communist passport at the time, leaving the crossing of Europe with visas really made me wish to have a passport, and then I built a business around it for many, many families.
And you were very young at the time when you went across and made the trip to Canada. How old were you then, and what effect did it have on your young mind?
Well, Canada is, for me, one of the greatest stories of immigration success. And they have they have built a country based on diversity and homogeneity and this experience of a successful melting pot. So yeah, the truth is that my parents arrived with 4 suitcases and $4,000, and 2 years later I was studying with Justin Trudeau in the same school, which was the best private school. So the country that allows you to do that without restrictions where you're coming from deserves the success that they have today. So the Canadian immigration model has been actually copied around the world for the last 25 years, from the investors to even the normal refugee and economic migration point system, which was adopted by Germany last year. We believe that that's one of the most successful models. It's not perfect, but it is one of the best.
So what was the path? So how old were you when you arrived in Canada with your...
I was 14 years old. We came directly from Bulgaria. Before that, my parents used to work and live in Morocco. So I was exposed already to international experience, even though born in Bulgaria. And it was a great experience of I think, creating as an immigrant. Entrepreneurship is something that comes very often.
And what did your parents do when they arrived in Canada?
So they started their own business. So that was kind of
what sort of business was it?
The accounting firm. So my father became an accountant and started his own practice, advising actually foreigners, immigrants who were coming to Canada, and he was making their bookkeeping and applications for different grants. And so as a financial business advisor of small or medium businesses, mainly startups, and most of his clients were immigrant Russians, Bulgarian, Eastern Europeans who had a hard time reaching out to Canadian law firms and accountant firms.
They had a hard time, you say?
Yes, as coming, they were 55, 60 years old. So for them, finding a job in a country made them actually be an entrepreneur. So out of necessity, I think they became independent. And for me, that was an example that even though I started in the banking sector in one of the biggest financial institutions in Canada, Bank of Montreal, managing the wealth of the very wealthy Canadians, I found out that there is something more in the financial industry than providing returns for your clients. And these bonds that Canada has that provide residency is the niche that I developed the whole business around. So
you were fairly comfortable in the finance world. Why did you decide to take a risk and start your own business?
It's more rewarding. I think it's bringing 10 or 20% return to your clients on their portfolio. You might get thank you, or you might say it's not enough. When with the asset of your clients, you provide them with that investment, a freedom of mobility, a second residence, a better future for his kids, that has no price. So I found it more rewarding for myself and for my clients to provide instruments, financial instruments that have a social impact for the welcoming countries where I have seen how jobs are created, small and medium businesses are funded, and in the same time how this family life changes completely with this extra access and this mobility to better world.
And Canada is still one of those countries, I understand it's still underpopulated officially, but how small were your beginnings when you started out this business?
Very small. I was competing with large financial institutions who were, the Canadian government approves only at that time 13 institutions to be in a private-public partnership, and you had to be a bank, you had to be a trust or a broker-dealer. So the cheapest company to start was a broker-dealer. It was $250,000 capital required and a team of 4 or 5 people. So I started my own firm, got the license, and I was competing with National Bank, with Royal Bank, with National Bank of Canada, some of the biggest institutions. And my benefit came into realizing that when you're too big, you have the benefit of a great institution, but when you need to change or go to other countries and offer other products, it becomes a very complex machine to turn around. So in that case, most of my competitors are no longer in business in Canada. For the fact that the world changed in the last 10 years so much, there's so many other countries that they couldn't offer, they couldn't touch, that they became obsolete.
Well, the first question I have for you is what sort of countries are in vogue at the moment where people want to go?
So Canada and US have always been kind of the #1 destination until the last 10 years. What happened in the last 10 years, Europe became the most attractive. So you have to understand the wealthy families coming from China and mainland China or Asia in general represent 60 to 70% of these wealthy migrants. The second biggest region is Middle East. That's around 20 to 30%. Russia and Africa represents less than 10% overall. And Europe became most popular because after the crisis of 2008, many European countries realized that instead of waiting for the Troika and for the IMF and European Union to fund them, they can go into this industry and saying, we need these social impact investments to create jobs, to build houses, to fund our banks, which are not so liquid anymore. And Cyprus, Greece, Bulgaria, Hungary, Spain, Portugal are examples of countries that completely turned around in the last 5 to 6 years from junk bonds, from very bad economies, from being the worst economic disasters in Europe into being right now one of the most prospering in the highest growth digit.
How has your business grown in the last decade?
Mainly advising these governments, because our Canadian experience and license was very valuable for these European countries. Caribbean islands as well, you mentioned a couple of St. Kitts and Antigua that have been around for a very long time as well. They always are popular. There is 5 islands right now who are attracting foreign investments, but the politics makes it a little bit more complicated to have a stable programs that run for more than one election term. In European, Canadian, normally we have less of insecurity, and there is more stable programs that stay over a 10-year period. So clients found as well that anywhere in Europe having a residence or citizenship is more valuable. It has less restrictions than Canada or UK, where you had to spend 6 months every year physically in order to retain your residence. Most of the other European countries, they say, well, if you invest the money, we're not going to force you to leave and spend 6 months in every calendar year. You have the freedom if you wish to do, or if you want to run your business from Cape Town or Joburg or Abuja. And this is what flexibility investors like. They want to have the plan B, they want to have their families in a safe place, but not the restrictions of permanently staying 6 months per year like in US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, which are the established other programs.
But I would argue at this particular time, bearing in mind the political temperature of the world, I think a lot of nations are becoming more inward-looking, becoming more nationalistic, and less outward-looking at the moment. Isn't that a problem for you, man, in your business?
You're right. If you look in the last 5 years, you will see migration being portrayed as, one of the worst things that can happen to our economy and to our civilization.
Well, elections have been won and lost on that very issue.
That is the problem, I think, with migration being used for political reasons, gain power or retain power. And companies like ours and our non-profit Global Citizen Forum is trying to change perception on that, which is not easy. Speaking with journalists, speaking with politicians, and events like WEF, or UNGA, where we're trying to change the perception that migration, when you zoom out from the last 5 years, have always contributed positively to society. Economists just did a report last week that the only way to lower the gap, social gap around the world, is to let people move. That will only thing that will make the world richer. We have the passport index that measures actually the mobility between countries. Where can you go with your passport? Which passport has the best ranking based on that mobility? And we have the World Openness Score, which is a 40,000. So if all the countries in the world can travel to all the countries within the 193 member states of UN, it will be 41,000. Since the last 3 years, we see a growth of 10%. That means that countries are signing more visa-free agreements between themselves, letting their citizens to travel visa-free. So perception in the politics, if you listen to Trump or to Marine Le Pen, you think that the world is becoming difficult to travel. The reality is different. Countries are opening, and UAE is a great example as a country which in the last 3 years have not only opened up themselves but provided mobility for their own citizens that went from 88 countries to nearly 180 countries in 3 years.
Then again, you look what's happening in Europe at the moment. The European Union is disintegrating slightly. Does that not concern people in your business and the fact that maybe these cracks will get wider in the future?
We believe that there is an opportunity in every crack. Yes, Brexit triggers a lot of concerns, but many other countries in the Balkans are saying that if Europe will maintain their importance and relevance is by expansioning in the Balkans. Expansion in the Balkans means that the 3-4 member states right now, which is like a gap in the European Union, eventually will be integrated in the next 10 years. That provides a lot of opportunities for these countries to really change their economies, to provide better opportunities for their own citizens and attract foreign investments, which right now has been lacking for the last 10 years.
And lastly, in this half, the country nearest where you live in Canada or United States, talking about building walls, talking about restricting immigration, getting rid of foreign workers. Doesn't that worry you?
It does worry me, as I said, on the short term. I just have a better hope on the long term that with the change of generation in the politicians that we'll see, right now, I think in the next 10 years, they will be the X generation. That means those prime ministers who are in their 40s that are coming with different ideas. And Macron and Trudeau are part of this generation, my generation, where we believe that the reality should be different. It will take time, so I don't foresee on a long term walls and migration being used as it is right now.
One story I was interested in, which I read on your blog, happened in January this year at Davos in Switzerland, World Economic Forum. You took part in this sort of Refugee for a Day program, where you were basically treated as if you didn't belong anywhere. I mean, that must, bearing in mind that your parents and grandparents had to flee some form of persecution in the past, how did that rattle your bones?
It was a great experience, and mainly for the other participants in the Davos who have maybe not have the experience personal to go to some of these refugee camps in Jordan or Turkey. It's a non-profit from Hong Kong who was actually setting up, staging an experience that lasts, I think, less than 40 minutes. But very intensified, where you really, it doesn't matter if you're next to Bill Gates or to Melinda, you're treated with Kalashnikovs on the floor, your watches are removed, you're shouted at, your dignity, removing your kids or your wife from you, separating in the dark. Your heartbeat goes to a level where you don't know where actually if this is a joke, if it's a game or it's a reality. And this is just 30 minutes. People spend on average 27 years in these camps. I have been to 3 or 4 camps in my life, and as a foreigner, they only show you the best of the camp. This experience in Davos was really magnifying the stories that you hear from some of the people in the camps that happens when they arrive, when they are moved from one country to another by smugglers. Some of the camps, of course, are not managed well by UN or other international agencies, and we don't hear about it, mainly in Africa. And this is where the horror stories are really lived.
And just give us a taste of it. The worst moment. What was the kind of terror among you? Because and sadly, this is one of the stories of the 21st century still.
Well, next to me was a businessman, and they put the real Kalashnikov in his hand and said, "Give me your Rolex." And he said, "Well, it's a game. I'm not going to give it." And the guy really hit his head and removed his Rolex, and the guy lost it. He didn't know if it was part of the game or and if he's going to get his watch. And then you realize that, if it is part of the reality that these people live, being separated from their families, from their assets, and it was just a watch and you felt that way, what would happen if that was your wife or your kid that will be taken away and you might never see it? It's as I said, it's a virtual reality experience for those that don't have the opportunity to really visit and experience it in life. And most of the people that were there completely changed their perception of what they see in the news in the camps, and they get more involved with organizations trying to support and trying to find ways to help refugees, because it is more than 250 million that are displaced now. And that number is only growing. With climate change, with political instability, this will be tripled in the next 25 years.
I mean, a terrible story indeed, but with the greatest respect, I mean, a business like yours that's based on people with money trying to find, surely you're not going to be able to help those people at all.
No, it is a privilege to work with some of these wealthy individuals, but we realize that we have also a responsibility as to the rest of these migrants. And this is why we have initiated a couple of initiatives in the European Commission called the Global Citizen Tax. Let's tax the wealthy migrants that are pouring, there are 7,000 families approximately every year entering Europe in one of the 8 countries, pouring 10 billion. Let's tax 2% and have a fund that will help some of the refugees coming from the same countries where the wealthy migrants are coming from, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Middle East, Africa, and providing at least a little bit of support. We calculated it would have been $1 billion by now in the last 2-3 years. So it's a lot of money, and it's not a lot of money. But linking these wealthy migrants that are the 0.1% and the 99% other, normal migration and refugees and economic migrants, I think it's a responsibility as an industry for us to do.
It sounds like a great idea, but how practical is it really, you think?
Very difficult. Try to impose something called a tax to any country in the European Union right now.
A lot of people you deal with, I'm sure they're moving because of tax.
Exactly. The problem is not with the clients. We did a survey of 1,000 clients, and we asked them, would you pay 2% more? 99% said yes. So the problem is the administrative procedure in Brussels and in a lot of these countries imposing in new regulations a federal tax, if you want, to member states, which right now are fighting for their own independence and saying this is not something you can do. And so we start lobbying country by country instead of going from top to bottom. And there is a couple of countries who are now initiating a mandatory donation when you apply for a citizenship or residency as an investor that will serve a certain need of migration funding.
Let's talk about Africa. You've got a global business. How many of your clients come to you and say, listen, I want to relocate to this country in Africa? How big a percentage of that is the people you deal with?
So right now there is no really any African countries that allows to receive foreigners who will make an investment and give them a passport. There is a couple of countries who are thinking it, we're advising them, but again, it's not really a mobility that will be provided, because even the African Union passport that we mentioned, which is supposed to be traveling in the 55 member states without visa, is not really a reality. There is more, I would say, African wealthy businessmen trying to get passports of other countries in order for them to travel outside of Africa. But we believe that this reality eventually will settle in. in the next 20 years, we believe that more of the African countries will liberalize their restriction on visa and mobility between their citizens.
Because unfortunately right now it's still seen as tantamount in Africa to selling passports or selling citizenship. And I think that's going to go on for a generation or two yet. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, the industry needs definitely better standards because many people don't know it, don't even find it that it's normal that you can do it. But it is something that with efforts in regulating different programs around the world, having the best industry standards to different countries that scrutinize the same way their foreigners, going through a very in-depth vetting process. And mainly is where the money goes. This is one problem we see, that each country is using the funds for different things. So we're working with a lot of now international organizations. We just appointed Nouriel Roubini on our board as an economist, helping the countries to understand how with the 100 million or 1 billion that we bring for one country, they can do the most for their own citizens. What is the leveraging usage? What is the social impact they can get the most out of it, of this limited resource that comes for residency or citizenship investment?
So in Africa, what are your hopes for the future? Because I mean, in the last 6 months or so, I mean, there's been border closures, there's been disputes, there's often tit-for-tat visa restrictions going on the continent. Yeah. I think the African Union passport is still a long way away. How are you reading it?
I do believe it's Paul Kagame legacy, maybe, if he can do it.
Do you think he will do it, Paul Kagame?
Well, that's one of his priority when he took the leadership of the African Union. We are seeing next year the Commonwealth gathering as well in Rwanda. There is this willingness really to make it happen. We're advising few actually African states on visa-free arrangements between them, security controls. So the wish is there. The implementation is a different story. I think that will take a longer time because of the disputes and the historic relationship between member states in Africa. Some are very, opposed on liberalizing this movement for security reasons, economic reasons, and etc. But this was the same thing in Europe 20 years ago. And look at it today. You can take the car and drive for 5 days and cross 20 countries. I just hope one day this will be a reality in Africa.
Because that's what a lot of the optimists say, that, well, it took Europe, well, if you look at it, 50, 60 years to get things together. Yeah. But do you think one day people...
I think one day it will
be looking at African Union passports an investment?
Yeah. I think there will be an interest. Africa, of course, it's 1.2 billion, as you know, of population, attracts a lot of interest from businesses. And even today, as a businessman, to go to Africa to do business, you need, as you know, even Dangote needs visa for 38 countries in Africa. I mean, he needed a visa to go to see the president of Angola last month. So he's an example that if somebody like him needs a visa, what about the rest of us, But he's a good example, and we were taking a few other like this to countries, sharing that you need to open up. That's the only chance to have to attract this investment that you need so badly.
What are the greatest problems in your business? I'm sure a lot of people look and say, okay, it's maybe the business I want to go into. That's what a lot of people watching out there think. But what are the biggest problems, bugbears in your business?
It is, it's a new business like every other new business. It comes with cycles of growth, reaching certain maturity. And right now we have a very critical moment for the industry where there is a lot of attention from the media, from the European Commission, from the OECD, looking into this industry from the lens of let's find reasons to stop it. Is it tax evasion? Is it security problems? So it's very hard for new starter companies to come in with teams that will answer all the concerns of barriers of entry to getting into industry. As I said, we have 11 government contracts. It's very difficult to start with 1 or 2. Once you have 3 or 4, then other countries are taking this experience. So barriers of entry are high stake to enter. But the reality is there is no way to stop it. I believe that the movement of people, it doesn't matter if it's wealthy or poor, it's unstoppable. So there will always be the demand of these people who will want to relocate to another, those that have the money, and there will be always countries that needs money. There will always be financial crisis. There will be needs for job creation, and they will find a different model. Now the models will adapt, they will change, there will be regulation, cross-national regulation, there will be extra due diligence, The same thing as financial industry has got. The same thing as fintech is going through. So it's unregulated. It will be regulated, and hopefully that will provide a lot of opportunities for more clean and transparent business.
And lastly, very briefly, your dream of a world of global citizens, no borders. Do you think you'll see it in your lifetime or your children's lifetime?
My mission in my life and my company is to live this world where my business will be no longer needed.
There can't be that many entrepreneurs who can run up and say that.
Yeah, if I don't need to provide facilities for visa and for resident, that means that this score of 21,000 is 40 or 41,000. That means people will be able to move freely, not restricted by the only thing which was outside of their control, the place where you're born. Everything else in your life, it's up to you. And then you're limited for the rest of it just because of that uncertainty and place that comes with a little passport and it says South Africa.
And lastly, yourself as an entrepreneur, how do you want to be people to remember you?
I built as I said, my family, my business, and actually my family as well. My wife is German. Our last daughter is from Ethiopia. We adopted, so I really live what I preach and what I do for a living, of embracing multinationality, culturalism, openness to the world. And I hope I motivate other people to do the same.
Thank you very much indeed. That's the word on the Entrepreneurial Edge here in Dubai from Armand Arton of Arton Capital, a man who wants a world of global citizens and no borders. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for from me, Chris Bishop, in Dubai. It's goodbye.